So back in February, I had the opportunity to have some conversations with some MPs, including yourself, as you mentioned, MP Anand, on how the 2020 federal budget would incorporate and allocate resources to fight climate change. However, since the beginning of this pandemic, we know that this government has had to allocate a lot towards combating the effects of COVID-19. Now I'm curious to see where the fight against climate change stands as a priority. What concrete actions is the government taking at this point towards the fight against climate change?
So you're exactly right that our government had a very bold agenda regarding climate change, which we discussed in my office that day, and which I campaigned on and spoke to many people across Oakville about climate change and the importance of promoting a green economic recovery. When COVID hit, it added another priority to our government's policy platform. And so what we've been trying to do is to incorporate green objectives into the COVID initiatives that we have introduced. So for example, in terms of giving loans to companies um, to assist with their economic recovery, they need to show that they've taken into account green initiatives and sustainable finance. And so there is an intention in our government, even with our COVID response, to incorporate the green economic recovery into that initiative. We also have invested $15.8 million to create green jobs and training opportunities for Canadian youth. And as I have mentioned to you before, people in Oakville, I believe, largely voted for me because I also advocated what they cared about, which was a green economic platform that considered environmental protection and climate change, addressing climate change as being front and center. And that, as I mentioned to you and will continue to do so, is extremely important to me. It's extremely important to the people of Oakville. And I personally try to live with a very small carbon footprint, but that's not enough. We need to keep moving ahead. And as we emerge into the next phases of this recovery, we will have to continue to examine what more we can do as a government and a country, in addition to the initiatives we've already implemented. For example, the price on pollution, and the planting of 2 billion trees, which was, but they're not going to be enough to ensure that we are addressing greenhouse gas emissions in the way that they need to be done so that we can reach net neutral by 2050.
Perfect. So I did have a question for Mayor Robertson, but I just wanted to do a follow-up question with you, MP Anand, as we're touching on the issue of greenhouse emissions. So I know that recently the UN climate change released the national inventory results for countries, and it did show that Canada's numbers were around 729 million tons of CO2 per year, and that's our highest level in more than a decade. So I'm wondering, how likely is this government to implement a carbon law to support climate action, similar to that of UK's Climate Change Act of 2008?
Well, it's a really good question. I'm not sure if you've been following the House of Commons, but it has been somewhat difficult, given that we're a minority government, to get any legislation passed. And so, for example, legislation that provided supports for persons with disabilities, which did not get passed by the other political parties in the House of Commons 2 weeks ago, which was extremely unfortunate. But I will say that passing legislation has been part of what our government has been committed to in terms of its commitment to a green economy. It's not really on the table for as legislation, but I would be very supportive of it, given my previous commitment to a green economy and actually meeting targets that will save our planet for our children and our grandchildren.
And I know that you mentioned that it's been a bit chaotic right now in the House of Commons. I know that the Prime Minister is expected to deliver a brief snapshot on of the federal finances on July 8th. but what can you tell us right now on how we can expect the fight against climate change to be reflected in the federal budget?
Real snapshot on July 7th. I assume that's what you're referring to?
Yes.
That's what's going to be released in the next couple of weeks. And as I said, our government is committed to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. But in terms of the specific items in the snapshot, I haven't spoken with the finance minister about this, and I would be misleading you if I told you that I had or I know what's in that snapshot, because I do not. So
Perfect.
I will want to see as you do.
Thank you, MP Anand.